Let me ask you a quick question this morning. How many of you had your life planned out? You knew what school you were going to go to. You knew what job you were going to get. You knew what line of education you wanted to go in. You knew who you were going to marry. Lord have mercy. You knew how many kids you wanted. How many of you? Raise your hands. Yeah, most of us. We have some idea, right? We have some idea. Thank you so much, Samuel, for doing that. In your 11 years, you have everything mapped out. Let me ask you a second question. How did it go for you? Yeah? Some of you are like, yeah, it was pretty close. A lot of times when we start off in life, this is how we imagine it to be. We think it's going to be a line. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to graduate from here. The next thing happens, next thing, and then you start to date a significant other and you think, this is where we are going to live. But how many of us really fall into this? This is where life happens. We think it's going to be one way, but really this is what happens to our life's journey. And so this morning I want to talk on the messy journey for a little bit today. And before we get into that, I just want to tell you a story. It was spring, it was cold, and it was just kind of like at that type of weather where you don't know whether to change your tires yet or keep your winter tires on. And so I was traveling that particular weekend. We were living in Ottawa, but I traveled to Toronto, and it was time to go back to Ottawa. And during that 6 years while we were traveling back and forth, every time I traveled to Toronto, I would take two of the kids. And so at that time, Samuel was 3, and I believe Isaiah was around 7 or 8. And I would travel with them because Grandma and Grandpa were in Toronto. And so I would drop them off. I would go do what I needed to do. I would pick them up. And you know how it is when you're traveling with kids. If you're traveling by yourself, sometimes it's just a duffel bag, right? But when you're traveling with kids, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you got to make sure that you have in there. And the thing about traveling back from Toronto to Ottawa is that our in-laws always bought extra stuff for us to take back. So food and diapers and all these good things. So here we were, the car was packed, we were heading back to Ottawa. And I thought, this is going to be interesting. As we were going out of the city, actually when we got to Scarborough, the steering wheel started to get heavy. And I couldn't turn the steering wheel. I knew that something was up, and I was in the express lane, so I had to get over to the collector's lane very quickly. As I got over there, because that's 6 lanes in order for me to cross, by the time I got to the shoulder of the road, I looked at the tire, and the front right tire shredded to pieces. And so, I pop up the trunk, because it was a Civic that we had. Open up the trunk. Everything is packed in the Civic, but where's the tire? It's all the way underneath. So I get everything outside of the Civic, the trunk, and I get the donut tire. Anyone know about the donut tire? Yeah, we get the donut tire out, and then I'm looking for the jack, and the jack in my car is one of those hydraulic jacks, but the jack in my wife's car was one of those ones where you have to turn it 1,000 times, and it only goes up a centimeter. Anybody know which jack I'm talking about? Yeah. The default jack that comes with your car. So there I was. I took out the donut tire. I took out the jack, and I started to go. And it seemed like it was like 1,000 turns on that, and it only kind of went up a little bit. Took off the tire. I put the donut tire on, and then I went to the closest Canadian Tire to get it fixed. Well, everybody seemed to have bad tires that day because there was a long line for me to get a new tire put on. And because it was that type of weather, people were ready to change their winter tires to their summer tires. So after 3 hours of hanging out at Canadian Tire, I'm now on my way, just leaving Scarborough and heading towards Ottawa. Calculated, I said, we're 4 hours behind schedule. Then we get to Kingston. Closer, yes. Steering wheel starts to get hard again. Hard to turn right or to the left. Same thing that happened. And now I'm parked on the side of the road. I look over, and now it's not the front right tire, but it's the front left tire. Same thing happened. I got to go back into the trunk, get everything out, get the donut tire again, start cranking the jack again. And again, I had to find the closest Canadian tire, went there. Everybody was there because they had bad tires. Again, 3 hours later, I'm back on the road. What should have taken me only 4.5 hours or 4 hours to get to Ottawa, it took me 14 hours of that day to get to my destination. They say that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And we visualize our destination, we visualize the goals and how we are going to execute the journey. But rarely does life ever take us in a straight line. We find ourselves detoured with sickness. We find ourselves being fired from work. We find ourselves with lack of finances in paying the bills and even paying for our school fees. We find that we're having these issues with our children, our spouse, our girlfriend, or our boyfriend. Sometimes the road that we're traveling on ends in divorce. Battling health issues, no matter how it is and how we travel, life is a messy journey. We find that in the life of Jacob this morning, and that's where I want to park. The life of Jacob, he goes through so many different things. His story actually begins in Genesis chapter 25 and goes all the way to 35 and beyond. I'm not going to go back in terms of what happened, but we all know the story of his life, where we find that Isaac and Rebekah have 2 twin boys, Esau and Jacob, and between them, they're always fighting each other. We find that in the story that Esau came out first, but Jacob was holding his heel, trying to get out first. We find that there is so much love of Isaac that is poured into Esau more than Jacob, and Rebekah pours her love out to Jacob more than Esau. We find that there is a time when Esau is starving and he sells his firstborn right. And then we find within this story that there is favoritism that is played of stealing the blessing from their father. And so we get into this chronological order of his life, where in chapter 28, Esau wants to kill Jacob. Chapter 29, he works for his uncle, Laban. But he also meets Laban's daughter, who he wants to marry, who is Rachel. Now, his uncle is Laban, which means that Rachel is his what? Is his? That's right, is his cousin. All these things tend to happen, and we know that he works for Leah. He works for 7 years, he gets Leah, and he works another 7 years in which he gets Rachel. Out of this relationship, we find that children are starting to be born, and so he has intimate relationships with Leah, and the first 4 children are born. Rachel's maid, not Rachel, but the maid, gives birth to 2 boys. And we find that now he moves over to Leah's maid. And there's another 2 boys that are there. Then he kind of circles back around to Leah. And then there's another 3 that are born there. And finally he gets to Rachel, to where there are 2 that are born. Chapter 31, Jacob wants to leave. Laban says, no, I'm blessed because you're here. Your presence allows for God to bless me. But in their move and in their flee, we find that Rachel steals from her father, steals the idols in her home, and they take off. In chapter 32, we know the story of where he wrestles with God all night. His brother Esau reaches out to him. In 33, he meets Esau. They make amends. Forgiveness is offered. Forgiveness is received. And in chapter 34, there's something that happens as they move into Canaan, where his daughter Dinah is defiled, and the prince has the audacity to not only defile her, but now wants to come back and marry her. the sons of Jacob go on a killing spree. And they want to take revenge for their sister. And because of that, the whole of Shechem now want to take on Jacob and his family. You talk about a messy experience that Jacob goes through. This is it right here before us. But as we look at the experience of Jacob, how many of us have gone through some similar experiences? Because going through a messy journey is not just for individuals like Jacob. It is actually a human journey. We go through things in life that sometimes that are challenging to us, things that don't turn out the same way that we think it should. But yet we continue on this life that God has given to us. In fact, Patriots and Prophets tells us that due to the decision that Jacob was making for him and his family, the Bible tells us that, or Ellen G. White tells us that cruelty and falsehood and dissension were manifest in the character of his sons. The seed that was planted from Jacob in his journey of not trusting in God was starting to show in the way that his family were treating each other and treating the people around them. Everything that we experience in the present has been planted by our parents. Everything that we experience in the environment that we grow up in is also planted from generations before our great-grandfathers or grandmothers, our grandfathers and our grandmothers, our parents, and even us as we have our own children. If we are not intentional about planting good seeds in our lives and in our families and in our children, the default seed is sin. And this is represented in the nature of Jacob and his journey. Now, we all know that we are selfish people. Amen? We are born into sin and we are just selfish. The first thing that you notice about a child when you put them together and you put toys in the middle, what is the first thing that they say? Mine. Mine, my toy. This is mine. And so that's something within us is that we have this bent to sin. And because of that, it is very easy for these things to be passed down from generation to generation. In fact, there are generational patterns in the book of Exodus chapter 34 which says, "And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation." There are some things that we continue on in our lives that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation. And if we really start thinking about those things that have been passed down to us, what does it mean for us to pass those things on? Because we haven't been intentional enough to address those things within our lives. You know, whenever we do premarital counseling, the first thing that I ask them to do is a genogram. And I asked them to connect the dots of generations. Go back and ask your parents, what were some of the things that you saw within your life? And the reason why I do that is because I want them to have to identify the generational patterns of illness, the generational patterns of divorce, of remarriage, the generational patterns of children being born in marriage and out of marriage, the pattern of substance abuse, addiction, diabetes, cancer, depression, communication patterns, and even intimacy. What does that look like as you now join with someone else? Because if there are patterns that we see in our lives and we don't recognize it, then we just pass those things off to our younger children for the next generation. If you grew up in a dysfunctional home, you will have a dysfunctional home. But also your children will have dysfunctional homes. Unless you are able to recognize and admit some of the things that you went through in life were not godly, were not right, were not good. An author once said, our background and circumstances may influence who we are, but we are responsible for who we become. Turn to the person next to you and say, you're responsible. I know we're saying it very quietly, but turn to the person next to you and say, you're responsible. Because we are. We're responsible for who we are today, and we're responsible for how our children can live in the future. I remember the first time I went to Andrews University, and I got there in the summer, and everything was still, summer, nice weather, and I had heard about the snow and the ice and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of had a mental picture of it, but I've never been in that situation before, never seen snow before, never driven on ice before. And so there was one time it had snowed, roads were icy, I didn't even know how to drive in that. And so I went the back roads to Andrews University, and it's kind of like an S-curve. And as I went around that S-curve, I went around the S-curve as if the roads were dry and it was like 20 degrees weather. And so as I went around and I turned, but the car kept turning as well. And as I started to try to course correct, I couldn't. There was nothing that I could do that can keep the car straight. And so at that moment and at that point, you just kind of let go. You allow wherever the car is going to go, and I spun around. It wasn't my car, by the way. And I kept spinning around, and then I just stopped. Praise the Lord, I didn't hit anyone. There was no one on the road at that time. And I didn't crash into anything. But I was like in the ditch. I believe that when Jacob in his family, as they were coming through once again, and everything that he had gone through, he was starting to lose control of his life and his life of his family. Jacob was losing himself in this journey. And the truth that in order for God to gain control of our lives, we have to lose control of our lives. Let me say that one more time. In order for God to gain control of our lives, we have to lose control of our lives. I know that we've gone through our own messy journeys. And you could probably think about what that looks like in your life. But I believe that the reason why we are here today is because of the grace of God. It is only because of the grace of God that we can be here today and worship in this setting and know the things that you have gone through in life and still give Him praise, honor, and glory. I'm glad I don't look like what I've been through. Let me say that again. I'm glad I don't look like what I've been through. And I'm glad you don't look like what you've been through too. But that is only by the grace of God that we're able to stand here today and give God glory and praise for all that He continually does for each of us. And so in this here today, there are three things that I just want to share on this journey that Jacob has, because right when he gets to that point where he lets go, in chapter 35, God gains control of his life. And so what does he do? And then he said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar where God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother. The first thing that God tells Jacob to do is arise and what? Arise and go, because the environment that you are in right now is pulling you down. The environment in which you are living your life right now, God has said, I need you to upplant you and move you to another environment where you can grow. An environment where I can pour into your spirits. And so, moving, it takes a lot out of us to do that. But sometimes it is necessary for us to move when God says move in order for God to grow us. And the thing that He does here, and I love it because God says, arise, go up where? To Bethel. He's been to Bethel before. way back in his journey. So there is this 30-year gap between him being able to be in Bethel the first time, and now God, with all of his family, is asking him to go to Bethel a second time. Bethel here for him means a place where he met God. It is a place where God had called him and he had made a vow. Even though he had gone his own journey in his own way and made his own decisions, God was calling him back to this place of Bethel to remind him of the goodness of God. Where is Bethel for you? Where is Bethel? Is it your home? Is it a place where God spoke to you the first time many years ago and said, this is what I want for your life? Where is Bethel for your life? Maybe God is calling you to that place to remind you of how far God has led you and how much he has loved on you and how much he continues to encourage you to keep going. There are stories that we have not told our children. And some of those stories are horrifying stories within our journey. Some of those stories are embarrassing. And I know that when I'm talk to my kids, sometimes I assume that they know some of the stories, but they don't really know the stories. I mean, they know Pastor Orlando, they know me as pastor because they were born into a pastoral family. I was already in ministry when they were born, all three of them. But they don't know Orlando the drunk. They don't know Orlando the liar. They don't know Orlando the thief. They don't know that Orlando. All they see is where I am today. In this story, what God does is that he moves Jacob and his family to a point where now Jacob tells the story of what God did for him in Bethel. Shares with him, and it is only at that point in which his children understand the grace that God had for their father. And it is the same grace that he has for the children. It is only in telling our age appropriate, obviously we can't spill everything about our lives. But as we grow, we're learning more, we're telling more, we're sharing with our children how God led us through those miserable times in our lives. And it is only, again, the grace of God that we are able to stand in this place, arise and go and do this. He wants to renew this calling in his life. The second thing here, it says that Jacob said to his household, and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods that you have with you and purify yourselves. Change your clothes, then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God who answered me in the day of my distress and who has been with me wherever I have gone. Now, one thing about me is that I love to eat strawberry shortcake for my birthday. Yes. And so for the last 19 years, I've always had a strawberry shortcake cake for my birthday. Cream on it, strawberries cut up all around it. It's beautiful. The problem is that I'm the only one that eats it. My kids don't like strawberry shortcake, but my wife makes it for me every birthday I have. And so because I eat it, what happens to the rest of it? Oh, birthday turns into birth week. And I keep going into the refrigerator and I cut myself a piece every single day. And I'm always just, singing happy birthday to myself. As long as the cake is in the fridge, there's always going to be a temptation for me to go into the fridge and eat. Here it talks about the temptations that was pulling them away from God, moving them outside of the will of God. And whatever it is for us, there are temptations that may be in our lives that we need to probably move away from. Things that are pulling us away from God and not towards God. Somebody has said that we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't even like. Expectations that people put on ourselves just to make them happy, whatever that looks like for us. God is saying, no, I need to renew you. Put away the things that become blockages, that become walls between us, boundaries, and just allow God to come into your life. Shift our lives, shift our minds, shift our hearts, whatever that is, however that looks like for us. Some of us get caught up in other people's expectations just to impress them. But yet God is moving us into a different sphere of relationship with Him. The last thing here that I want to share with us is thrive. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but I want to call you Israel. And there's a difference when we think about this word Israel and the name Israel. Jacob means supplanter, but Israel means triumphant with God. And so even in this messy journey that Jacob has, God says, no, I want to take this name away from you, this identity that is part of you, that has been part of you for many years, this Jacob, this supplanter, this deceiver. And the thing I want to give you is this name, triumphant with God, because you are only triumphant when God is in your life. Some people have called us hopeless, but God calls us wonderful. Amen. Some people have called us worthless, but God has called us worthy. We've been called aimless before, but God has called us determined. Insignificant, but God has called us great in the kingdom. Useless, but useful for God's kingdom and God's work. We've been called cursed, but God says you are not cursed, you are blessed. And you are my child. And the things that I want to do in your life is more than you can even fathom or imagine. God takes this mess that we have in this life and He uses it for a message for Him. You know, as we think about and we talk about messy journeys, Pastor Messiel talked last week about the heaviness that is around the campus at this moment, especially with finals and projects, the professors. Well, if it was heavy last week, it's definitely more heavy this week. And so we're asking you to pray for our students. Pray for their journeys. There's a lot of them that don't know what they're going to do after they graduate. There are some that are going back into unsafe spaces. This has been their safe space for them to be here at school, but they're going back into unsafe spaces, which they have tried to run from. We're praying for them. We're praying for their exams this week and also their projects that are due. Messy life, messy journey. But here's something that I want you to pray for. It's a personal one. On Wednesday last week, as we bring this to a close, Wednesday last week, we received a phone call. Now, Liz's mom had been in hospital since Friday of last week. And so the doctors got a handle of it, and they were helping out. But come Wednesday, they said that even though she was getting better physically in the infection, she was becoming more and more unresponsive. Wednesday, she was fully unresponsive. There was bleeding in the brain. And so right at that moment, they wanted to take her into surgery, brain surgery, to stop the bleeding. Liz jumped on the red eye on Wednesday night, got there Thursday morning, and she's right there right now. And so she comes out after the surgery that has happened to her mother, and the doctors are like, yeah, there's no surprises in here. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. The thing is that she's still unresponsive, even after the surgery. And so she sent me a picture of her mom, tubes, machines, bandaged around her head because of the surgery. And so we're asking our church family in this messy journey that we're going through, we're asking for your prayers. Pray that God would hold Liz's mom in this moment. We pray that you will also pray for Liz and her brother and her father during this time as well. And as they're going through this messy situation and challenge that they're going through, that God will continue to grant them peace during this time. As we bring this to a close here today, the Bible speaks about Lamentations. It's one of my favorite verses as I ask the praise team to come on up for the final song. It says, "Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed. Because his compassions fail not, they are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." I pray that God will continue to be with us and lead us in this journey of life. Truth be told, the messiness is not just behind us, it's actually in front of us too. And so we call upon each other that God will continue to grant us peace as we walk this journey, that no matter what we face from here on in the present and the future, that God will always show himself in these moments. God bless.